Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and tonight we're joined by a special guest, Laura Burr, licensed marriage and family therapist over at the Marriage Place in Frisco, Texas.
Yeah. Hi, Alan.
Hi, thank you for joining us tonight, Laura.
Thanks. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, so for you guys tuning in, Laura specializes in treats many things, but specializes and has a passion in treating couples and inviting couples into the office when they've got some struggles going on. And really helps them navigate that. And tonight we just want to hear a little bit more from Laura, her perspective, so that we can impart to our audience maybe some helpful tips, but also perspectives from an expert.
Thanks.
What got you into working with couples and noticing and developing that passion?
Yeah, actually, mine just is really from a personal perspective. I was in a marriage for 23 years, and my husband had sex addiction. That kind of came out year 5 in our marriage, and we got through that seemingly, and just kind of became the superstar couple for actually a counseling group in the town that we lived in, and began mentoring other couples, that kind of thing. Um, and then just over time, um, him falling out of some of his recovery stuff and whatever, I think and time passing, I think some of that didn't didn't stick because I think he wasn't faithful to his recovery, and and, and so got divorced, and then decided, hey, I'm already in this space and really enjoying working with people and really helping people. And I have a lot of insight that a clinician might not normally. So let's make this work for other people too. Like, I don't want other people living the way I've been living. So
Yeah. And I'm sure, like any of us who work in this field, we find with our lived experience, it has a way of finding us in our clinical practice.
yeah.
It's like whatever's watching has a sense of humor. Said, okay, let's help. You're working on this. Let's help others work on this. And
Exactly. I mean, our deepest pain, right, is our biggest connection with other people.
yeah,
So.
how would you, for those who are tuning in and they've heard the term sex addiction, and we'll get into the couples therapy stuff too to define some of those tenets that you focus on, but they've heard these terms, sex addiction, before, but they're like, what's going on with that? How would I be able to tell if I'm struggling with that or if a loved one is struggling? Is there any kind of tips or tricks that you would share to kind of gain some awareness around some of that?
I mean, I think the sex addiction can look really different for a lot of couples in the way that it manifests. Um, I do think that for most people that are involved in a sex addiction, it started probably way before the marriage or the relationship did. So there's a little measure in that this was going on before this major relationship started. Um, and so some of the patterns may play out that way. You may be able to identify some things that way. I find it really obvious in the connection of the couple. Like, the couple feels very disconnected. One of them feels like they don't know what's going on completely with their spouse or with their significant other. And then it also plays out in objectification and how they interact with the opposite sex sometimes too. So it varies really a lot from person to person, I think, couple to couple.
Yeah, I'd be curious if you agree with this perspective, because this is one of the ways I look at it with the men that I work with, is there's an aspect of the obsession compulsion acting out, right? Prostitutes, pornography, um, paying for sex in any form, uh, head on a swivel, checking out women in the mall, all that kind of stuff. And then there's this other lane, which is the subtle part that I think that you are deeply touching on there, which is the feelings of worthlessness that come from childhood traumas, and just kind of just emotional pains and resentments in relationships. A lot of times can also be complicated by cross addictions and things like that. But I'm curious
Absolutely.
if you would agree with that.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point too, I think there's a lot of dichotomy in the way sex addicts live. So sometimes it is really hard to catch on to what's really happening there, from a spousal perspective, because, you know, just the old adage, like, it's the spouse that is the last one to find out. And I think that's really true. I don't think it's the spouse being dumb about the situation or blind about the situation or even unwilling to see it. I mean, I'm sure that can be a pattern there at times, but it really isn't the spouse not wanting to see things most of the time. Most of the time, there's just such a dichotomy with the way they're showing up in one place and what they're doing when no one's around.
Yeah. Yeah, similar to any addiction, right? It's
Absolutely.
not that somebody doesn't want to see it. It's that a lot of times they're just being lied to.
Correct. Yeah.
And then you get into all the nuanced space where it's like, well, why are the lies occurring? It's not that these people are like these evil, rotten humans. It's a disease. And honesty is the cure. You know, if there ever was going to be a cure, we know that if you stop working it, it stops working, right? So
Right.
you got to stay linked up to the cure in any form of recovery. But that's at least what I've seen, and I'd be curious from someone who works with couples day in and day out, that honesty piece up front, because my ears perked up and you said the spouse is the last person to find out, when in reality, in a healthy relationship, they should be the first person to know the gruesome details.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you're saying too is exactly what I tell couples. I'm like, how's the connection? And one of them will usually say, we don't have one. Or we used to, but we don't anymore. Or it's not like it was. And so that connection of really feeling close, not just simply like things are good and we both feel happy together, but how connected, and that intimate connection. And I think that's the key in figuring out where your relationship truly is on any level.
Yeah, yeah, and that word intimacy. Maybe we could define that for a moment.
Intimacy.
Yeah, there you go. It's always wonderful when I just kind of open that up, because that's how my therapist taught me. It blew my mind the first time I heard into me. See, it has nothing to do with the physical, the sexual, none of it. It's, can I allow myself to be seen?
Right. Yeah. And that's a really scary thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you see everything, then are you still going to pick me? And I think it's real interesting that our parents, in some respects, we kind of feel like they had to like us. They had to pick us. They didn't have a choice. They got handed us. But our spouse is really that one relationship that it's supposed to be unconditional. But there are conditions on it, right? Like, we take a vow so that we have expectations of not being sexually active maybe with other people, or it's defined in some way. And so we have an expectation that is going to be an unconditional place, yet it's so scary to reveal ourselves, that naked and unafraid idea.
Yeah, both through personal experience and working with people, there's a feeling of desperation when there is times that you've tried to be seen and you feel not seen, right? And then you feel abandoned. And the way I had always been guided to see is like there's a real deprivation in there when you don't provide those things to yourself. And I think this is a lot of times what we see in modern society too, is like everybody clamoring over each other for the next best relationship. And it's really just like that deprivation of like, I really just need a hug. You know? I need to be seen. I need to be heard. And I'd really like a hug. You know? But from somebody who's going to take the time to get to know me. And that's the interesting part, is like you were saying, it's almost like that negotiation. It's not about your status and where you are in life. It's about, are you willing to negotiate some of the darker sides of who I am and who you are, to know each other and come together. And I'm sure we could say that a million different ways, but it sounds like that's the path, if we come into these realms to work on our relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that comes to mind too is just, when we're kind of fighting those demons of like can I show or whatever, but we have such that harsh internal voice sometimes that's just so mean, and we would never maybe even consider treating someone else like that, yet that's the voice that echoes in our head behind some of that keeps us trapped, right? Like, you can't show that, that's stupid, or I can't believe you would do that. How could you and then show someone else
Yeah.
and get that acceptance?
Yeah, and men and women express those things similarly, but sometimes in different manifestations in the room. Maybe we can take a turn into like some of the ways you see that showing up, where people are kind of hiding themselves in couple sessions when they've stepped into a room where they've paid to let everything be seen. And I'm curious if you could shine some light on some of that.
Yeah, I think the most common one that I have, and I'm not trying to like do a men bashing thing or anything, but I feel like men also get very logical, and then they want to come in and say she wants to be illogical. She just wants to be in her feelings, and this is a big deal, and it's not a big deal, and whatever. And I usually stop people right there, and I'm like, wait a second. Feelings are incredibly logical. They give us so much information
Yeah.
all of a sudden. Like fear tells us we should run or fight or get out of the way or do, we need to have a response.
Yeah.
Anger tells us that a boundary has been crossed, that we're not standing in the right place, that we need to do something about it. Sadness lets us know how much we cared about something and that if it's worth fighting for or not. There's so many things that we get from just that quick information of that emotion. And as women, women with estrogen are going like this, and men, man, guys, you have it kind of easy. You're just kind of even, but that's the compliment, right? Like for guys, this is what's attractive sometimes, like when it's happy and in a good
Sure.
space, right? And this right here is what women need to go, oh my gosh, like I'm so tired right now. I just need a place to lean in.
Yeah, I always think about it, and there's one aspect here where the culture has become so opposed on the extremes, where when we stand in the middle, it's like, hey, it's not men bashing. It's like what you just shared is so important for every. Let's just say, like, if you're a young adult trying to start a family, these are things you're going to need to know and get good at. To know where we fall in line, like just in the sense of like a heterosexual relationship, knowing where we fall in line with each other. I was thinking as you were sharing that, it's like the steadiness, let's say emotionally sometimes, where a dude maybe doesn't go too high or too low, is that's the quote unquote logic that they try to lean on. When the reality is what's actually happening is what you are saying, which is emotions give you so much information. They're the one thing you really can't argue with. They're
Right.
there whether you want to acknowledge them or not. And when a healthy man can stay in that place, there's a lot of room for the people in our lives, right? Women or children, to kind of bounce around and come back here. It's kind of one of the duties we have as men.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
As opposed to being pissed off about that as a dude, we could get good at that and listen, because when someone goes a little bit higher on the range and a little bit lower, they may have a lot of insight to share with you here that makes the logic work, as the way I've always kind of interpreted
Yeah,
it.
exactly. I think you're right on. I think that, we both complement each other for sure. But I think too, men tend to kind of, they get uncomfortable with the fluctuation. And so they kind of want to stay in this middle logic place. And then this sounds crazy to them. The up and down sound crazy to them. But that's where the connection is when you can share that emotion on both sides, because that's our most vulnerable place.
Yeah.
I think it comes a little more naturally to some women, most women, than men, as opposed, not all. Like, that's not absolutely true. Like, depending on how we grew up and what's acceptable and not acceptable, those kind of things. But yeah, I think that is a really big thing in my counseling rooms, is just going, no, this is it's okay to meet each other here. Like, this isn't crazy, and this is where you lose your connection or you find your connection.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's kind of like the old pictures. You know, there's this one video that went viral years ago on the social media rounds, and it was just this grayscale interview of this old man sitting on like a porch of a farm, and they ask him like, what's the worst part about being old? And he deadpan looks at the camera and says, the haunting loneliness. And I often, as you're describing this, and when I'm working with young dudes, it's like being open to the fluctuations that other people are taking you to, like, you know, in healthy reason, right?
Right.
This is, like you're saying, this is how we connect. It's also how you make sure you're not a crabby old man sitting on a porch in a farm, lonely and just waiting for the end.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and you know, that's all too familiar for the man who's pissed off staying right here in the middle and pushing anything else out because it's not logical. Adhering only to the narrative of stoicism, you
Right,
know,
right.
I'm not so convinced that we've strayed very far from that in society. It can be useful, but it should not be your only doctor. And we could read other books, you know, and
Right.
trust other people, especially the opposite sex. We were designed to interact and benefit from each other.
Agreed. And I also like the other point that you brought up there too, is that anger turns into, you know, you've heard the term probably root of bitterness, but it also, like, it turns into resentments, which according to Gottman, you know, is one of those 4 killers of our relationships. And then that resentment becomes bitterness. And we are always becoming. And so what are we becoming? What are we going to be in those next 10 years, in those next 10 years, in those last 10 years?
Yeah.
You know, are we going to be a bitter old person that everybody goes, nope, put them on a home and let's and let's get out of here as fast as we can? Or is this going to be where you have those relationships that you've really nurtured along the way, that you've stayed close, that you've poured into, that come back for you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I work predominantly with California-based clients, and as I'm sure you can imagine, right, coastal California, very wealthy area, and there's oftentimes the clamoring and the feelings of worthlessness because one generation's got a ton of money and they're clamoring to try to get to this place, and it's one of those other threads in this of you know, prioritize the connections, your relationships, go on a bit of that journey with the emotions, go with that in your life. It's actually one of the pillars, I think philosophically that we're given is like, I always come back to these ones is go with friends. I heard this at church this last week and it just really stuck with me. And I've used this in different aspects in therapy is go with friends, right? A community of people who understand you. Go with emotion, right? So vulnerability and talk and invite it in. Go with endurance, stay consistent with those 2 things, and go with God. And we know just with recovery stuff, you can define that however you want. But you do those 4 things, you can have a pretty balanced life. And one of those things worth reminding men, since we're on the topic, is emotion. Go with emotion. Don't cut yourself off.
Yeah. And I like what you said too, just then about community, because when couples first walk in, that's really the first thing I want to know, like wherever they are, whatever, you know, especially dealing with these bigger, harder issues, the first thing I say is, what's your community like? Who are you checking in with? Like, especially when I'm talking to a lot of people on the sex addiction side that are involved in any addiction, it's they've isolated themselves because they want to do their thing, or they've only surrounded themselves with the people that are involved in addiction as well. And so, who's your community? Who are you checking in with? Who are you talking to? And who's feeding you? Because that, you know, there's that idea that we're like the 5 people that we're around the most. We're kind of a conglomeration of that. Well, who's your 5 people?
Yeah.
You know, and then for my spouses too, like, who are the people around you? Are you talking to your family? Are you cut off? Are you in a different town? Well, then we have telephones now, so get on that, you know, and be involved on the phone. You know, use your drive time, call people, call those old friends that you haven't talked to and say, hey, I need a friend right now. And I guarantee you, a lot of those people are so happy to hear from you, and they didn't pick up the phone either.
Right. And that's okay. I
Yeah.
get it. Over my years in therapy, I work predominantly with men, and this
Mm-hmm.
is one of them. As men age, is like, well, that bastard didn't call me for 2 years. I'm cutting him off. It's like, well, before we do that, let's remember that it's 10,000 pounds the phone on either end,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, they're having just as hard a time remembering to pick it up and call you. It doesn't mean he's good or bad at it, right? It just
Right.
means life happens. And especially with long-term friendships, just
Mm-hmm.
pick up the phone, because that bridge never gets burned. If unless something tragic has happened,
Mm-hmm.
you can always pick up the phone and call people. And the same is true for women as well.
Right. And I think that, this is kind of coming back to the couple thing, but that intentionality. I've had one of my best friends is one of my best friends because I walked up to her and I went, I think you're so cool. I want to be your friend. And she's, it's 15 years later and she's still one of my good friends. And then I have some other friends that we just did life together and we're good friends. And then there's those friends that you don't talk to very often, but also like when there's stuff going on in my life, I pick up the phone because I need a friend. And you know what? Those women are still there for me.
Yeah.
And they always will be. And I know that. And, if they pick up the phone and call me as well, like I put everything down and I'm on the phone.
Yeah.
So I love that. But the word intentionality too, right, is with those intentional conversations of the emotions, of the thing, the touches that we're talking about with just checking in with your spouse also, like checking in with friends, but checking in with your spouse,
Yeah.
making sure and having that intentionality so that you have that connection.
Yeah.
Because day in and day out, like I have so many couples too that are in just like a really hard period of life as far as like kids are young, parents are aging and they're helping with them. They may have, kids with high needs, medical or special needs kind of thing, or just, and then they're both trying to get up to the next tier in their workspace. They're trying to, live the dream. And then also, then their kids get home from school and they're doing, a sport every day and games on the weekends. And then they're traveling with club sports and just how do you connect?
Yeah.
Right? Like, and then they go, oh my gosh, our marriage is in a wreck. And it's almost like, really? Wow. Like, how'd you get there?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I'm finding more and more how important that is in my own life. My significant other has 3 kids, and sports and baseball, volleyball, school, homework, put the kids to bed, and there's a necessity for the intentionality. Are we getting at least 30 minutes, an hour of time for us to just communicate? How was your day? The drive time is really helpful to have those conversations. But there's this aspect in it that you were touching on of you almost start to have a base of knowing how to be intentional.
yeah.
Right. So there's the side here for men that we were kind of touching on before, which is, go out, brother, and get yourself an emotional pinwheel on Amazon. If you don't know what it is, Google it, pick one up. It tells you what all the emotions are. But then on the flip side, what are you noticing are some of the struggles? Let's say even once a dude is starting to try to work on those things, what are some of the struggles that the women in the room are struggling with from your expert perspective?
They're struggling with, so a lot of women, whenever they're under a lot of stress or they're wanting that connection, because I find it actually is really, okay, I'm not gonna lie. There's a little entertaining part here for me, but I love asking my men in the room. So, how long has your marriage been on the rocks or not going well? And they'll say, "Oh, a couple months." And then I'll turn to the woman and say, "How long do you think it's been going on?" "Oh, like 3 years." And so the difference in opinion there is a little entertaining. I'm not gonna lie, but.
It shows how we process life differently, certainly.
Exactly. But my point, though, is that women feel that disconnection very early, and it takes men a while to catch up with that.
Yeah.
And so, then women, excuse me, start getting where they're nagging a little bit, but they don't start out nagging. They start out wanting that connection. and then they get where they say it more often, or they get where they're a higher pitch, and that's when men just seem to just like glaze over. So she doesn't start out like that, but that's what she's, and when a lot of men are hearing, like, she's going, well, you've been here and here and here, and they're hearing she's complaining again. Here she goes again. She's always being negative because I bring home the bacon, I do all the stuff, and I'm showing up. Like, I know all these guys that don't even have a job or don't even do this or this. And yes, they are. They're fulfilling that role well, and they're doing a good job. So it's not a dissection on their on their character, but they're not connecting. And that's what I hear wives fighting for is, where's my connection? Where's my partner? Where's my man?
Yeah. Well, I think it's just a brilliant call out to put the wedge right in the middle of the web, which is like, on one side there's like this perceived attack, and you see this in social media and just the media in general, that men are kind of positioned in that place, and then you have on the other side of it, I'm lacking this connection, and now I've gotten into a place where now there's an awareness and there's some words to it, and let me just cram it and cram, right? It's like these are the extremes, and then the nuance of it is like how we're healing these things. But there's that important middle ground that you're highlighting of, we view the worlds differently, and being able to not justify why we're behaving a certain way is what I think all the information a lot of times on like the viral stuff on the internet misses, or just even media when they try to depict it, they miss the core of the issue, which is you don't have to justify, you don't need to defend yourself. It's not an attack. My therapist she would tell me this, is the first act of war is always defense. If you think someone's coming at you with an attack, just walk away, take a breath. Right? Circle back. And I tell my dudes and the women that I work with as well, it's never too late to circle back. So if something bothered you, step away, take a breath, make sure you take the bass out of your chest, maybe say it appropriately, talk to somebody else, our community, about it, and then come back to your loved one and say, hey, when this was said, I felt this way. All right? So now the emotions, again, start to play a factor in how important they are, where if we just go back to what we were talking about earlier, men come in with the things you were highlighting. Well, here you are nagging again. You. And I drill it home, and then I'll shut up on this one. Man or woman, if you come into a relationship and you start using the word you better gear up for a battle.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, we got to take that one out of the vocab.
Yeah. Well, and men come in too, like, they just tell me what I need to do to fix it. Give me that box to check. And the thing is, it's not about the box. If it was about the box, they're checking it a lot of times. Sometimes they're not. But a lot of times they are already checking the box. It's that we need to go from head to heart with that connection, not just tell me what I can do, give me an action, which is where my men tend to want to go, because we want to fix it, we want to take care of this, we want her to stop. We just need her to stop.
Yeah. God, I wish I could remember the four. I'm sitting here as you're sharing that, and there's four of them. I remember three of them. It's mothering, managing, and manipulating, and there's a fourth. But oftentimes that's the core of where you're hearing like their displacement of the issue. Well, she's managing me and mothering me and manipulating me and all these things, and it just gets so entangled. When the reality is we all need to just kind of, when we're in the distress, give it time.
Yeah.
Right. Like how you were saying before, sometimes the man takes time and a long time to realize the problem. He also needs time and maybe even a long time to resolve the problem. But I think that's most people when we start to get into that part of the conversation. It just depends on what the problem is.
Yeah.
We need time.
Well, and I see some of that as even a masculine feminine issue as well, because as women, a lot of times, again, not every woman, we go in with a lot of words. And we have a lot of emotion, and we go in talking 90 to nothing. And sometimes my guys are just like, okay, that's too many words. I can't follow it, or I need you to slow down. And it takes my men a lot of times a little bit more time to process everything that's being thrown out there at them.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'm telling my women, slow down, back up, give him a chance to think, and also trust him with the answer, because a lot of times he will be able to come back with something that's better than she could have asked for.
Yeah. Yeah. And being okay with the version he's able to give you at this
Exactly.
time, or that
Yeah.
she's able to give you at this time. That's a big one. I think a lot of times that we see in our offices is people just aren't okay with what's being presented.
Right. Yeah, there's one way to load the dishwasher,
right.
and that's it.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Are the dishes clean? Then let's just go with it.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, obviously there's the exceptions, like things we touched on earlier, like when there's an addiction and no desire to work on it, or it's just completely been abandoned. There are some maintenance things in life that, if not adhered to, it comes back to the boundary question, and we've talked about it a few times on this show of, if this never changes a little bit ever, are you willing to choose this person? And if the answer
Right.
is no, you need to get out, right? That's Cloud and
Absolutely.
Townsend, The Boundaries. Yeah.
Yeah.
That book that has the pencil line down the middle. Yeah. But other than that, like roommate problems like the dishes and laundry and things like that, these are things where there is no black and white answer. You're both going to probably do them slightly differently, but can we be cool with that? And then there are other things that are relationship issues, but some
Yeah.
couples are cool with it and some aren't.
Right.
And we have to define that for ourselves individually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have a lot of couples sometimes that we have to sit down and really figure out what each values in a relationship, and what's important, and what are the hills you're going to die on, and what are the hills you can like let go. So,
What are some of the kind of main chief complaints that come in your office, knowing that they manifest into a lot of other things? But let's say someone's listening to this and like, I've been considering couples therapy. These are some of the chief complaints that you hear come in for an intake. So if they're sitting there thinking like, I'm dealing with some of these things, couples therapy is there for them.
well, obviously the main complaint I always get is we have communication issues, but that's a little hard to define.
Right.
And every single couple I know comes in with
Yeah.
that complaint for sure. One of the things I think I would say too is that for most couples, infidelity is a really, really big, painful issue, whether we're talking about it being associated with sex addiction or not. And I think a lot of couples think, I'm just going to get through this. I'm just going to get through this. Or it's even just so much embarrassment and shame around the issue. They don't want to admit it or talk to anybody. But I do think that initial reaction, a lot of times, of finding out about infidelity is very traumatic. And it's not as simple as just, I'm gonna just like put my head down and get through this. It really is a process of walking through it. And if you're in a relationship with someone who does have an addiction, I think the recovery is just so different for each party involved, and it also is so overarching in the whole family. And to just say, okay, we're just gonna we can make it through, because I'm not gonna leave. I can do this. And I just think that is really sad for people to go through that alone. I can't even imagine trying to get through some of that alone. And so I guess that would be something that I would say, no, get community around you first, and get some help, get some professional help on that.
Yeah, I would agree with you across the board. And anybody who's worked with me or does currently knows I'm hard nosed, and I let people know up front. So it's their choice whether they work with me. When they find out how hard nosed I am when these issues are at play, you need to be in those 12-step rooms. It's empirically the only thing. When it's the active addiction, we know it's the only thing that's going to work. Ultimately, with the support of all the things that we know are supplemental, this is where I tend to be very purist, I guess, in those ways. I'm open to all kinds of ideas, had all kinds of conversations on the show. The way I treat is very straightforward on those things, because I do get cases where they're really affected. And so they need that support. And then the family members. right? Outside of any of the active addiction, the family members oftentimes do not know how affected they are. It's kind of that statistic of like all the unidentified deaths that walk into the hospital every year that
Yeah.
can be rooted back to those. What are they? ACT scores, the childhood traumas
Yes.
that mirror the codependent symptoms that you would find in how Al-Anon works. Right? We are a society that is deeply affected by addiction,
Yeah.
and it affects the family members in ways that are very hard to see until you dig into it. But once you do, like you were saying, it's very hard to do those things on your own. And you can't sometimes just walk into a church, right? Because they may not understand, but you can walk into a room full of other degenerates and they're like, hey, what's up? Welcome.
Right.
Yeah, take a
Right.
seat.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Yeah, sometimes getting my addicts in to get help is a little bit of a difficult process, because they think that they can take care of it on their own, like they're in a crisis point and they can, get rid of their vice for a little bit and kind of get through. And they're like, no, I got this. But if they're not starting to go through some steps and learn about their addiction at that point, they fall off the edge usually pretty quickly, honestly. And they don't.
Yeah, it's within that first 90 days typically.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and most of the time it's not 90 days.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
from
yeah.
my experience.
With substances especially, but interestingly enough, substances, gosh, I'm crisscrossing my hands when I could have just done this. But sex addiction, right? More behavioral issues.
Yeah.
The relapse rate are much quicker than even substance use relapse rates. A lot of times because of ease of access,
Right.
to
Yeah.
material, right? Like the internet and things like that, or just looking at someone in public. And there's a misconception in society of like how dangerous those behaviors are, emotionally, spiritually, when your head's on a swivel. And it's like I always tell the dudes, when you hear the click clacking of the heels, and it's like how dangerous that is to your self-esteem.
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the sex addiction is really difficult because, they can't just not park at the bar, it's all up here. It's all in their head. So there's so much of the ritual and the building up and
The fantasy.
you're right, the fantasy of it, that it just pervades every part of them, and way more than they realize, and also probably their spouse even realizes until you get some education on that and really start learning about how it is impacting. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's the power of the 12-step rooms as well, both for sex addiction and substance use, and on the flip side for the family members. Things like Al-Anon, is there's just so much education, and so much support, and it's just given for free.
Yeah, no, I think that, and also it's automatic community, right?
Yeah.
Back to where we started, that
Yeah.
community, pulling those people in around you, because, we get hurt originally from that community, but that's also how we heal.
Yeah. Yeah, I was telling a client today, I said, some of the hardest lessons you'll learn in your life, you'll learn for free in places like that. And some of the easiest ones you'll learn here with me, and you pay a premium for that. And my hope is that you find more of those places. That's my job, is to get you connected there
Right.
as quickly and as effectively as possible, because I can't be around forever the way that can in your life.
Right.
Because our relationship therapeutically, although designed, depending on your approach, to last a while, isn't going to last you your whole life.
Right.
We're going to have downtimes, and in those downtimes,
You're going to
gonna
run
need
out
the
of money to
support.
pay me.
Yeah, your
So-
co-pays are up. I mean, you
Yeah,
need
exactly.
the support that's just for free and for fun.
Right. And that is accessible, right? Because also the other thing I tell people, I'm like, if you text me at 2 a.m., I'm not going to see that text.
Yeah.
So, you find that mentor or that person that is on for you, and when you're falling through a gap, that they're there.
Yeah.
And that, my relationship with them can't have that. I
Right.
mean, I might be with another client,
Right.
right? Like, it's that simple. So,
Yeah, yeah, we're not BetterHelp over here texting our clients.
Exactly.
I won't go too deep into that rabbit hole, but we joke about BetterHelp on this show all the time. Yeah, bless their hearts.
I love that.
Yeah. So you're over at the Marriage Place,
Yes.
and there's quite a robust team over there.
Yes.
Does everybody over there work with couples and families, or is this just a select few of you that do that work?
Yeah, so we all love couples. That's why we're there. We all also do individual because as we get, rolling with a couple, a lot of times issues will stand out in the coupleship, and we're like, okay, if you can go get your individual and you go get your individual, then we'll really start rolling here. We'll really get some traction. So we definitely all do individuals as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we all have different kind of specialties as also. So you can look at our bios and just pick somebody that resonates with you.
Yeah. Yeah, and you guys will be able to find the website. As always, we put it in the description on the full-length video on YouTube. We'll make sure in the description to put the website there with your bio. One of the things I like on the website, maybe you can speak to this more being there day in, day out, is pro-marriage, right? They're
Absolutely.
and I like that because you can run into a lot of clinicians that are pro-divorce, which is interesting on either end.
I even had I had a situation where one of the spouses was actually in their own personal counseling, and they were encouraged to be in an affair to see if this marriage should work out or not.
Oof.
And we all know where that one probably ended, because
It's interesting because I try to stay as non-biased, obviously, as a therapist as I can, but sometimes I hear things and I'm just like, oof, ew.
yeah,
What?
yeah. Well,
It's
I mean, there's really no way out on that one.
Yeah.
Like new and exciting is always going to win.
Yeah.
If you're really trying to test the waters, right? So if you really want your marriage to work, that's probably not a great place to start.
Yeah.
Is trying something else out, but it is hard to stay in either way. Like either if you're leaving a marriage, you're gonna have to do some hard work on either side, with or without that other person. So, the bonus of staying with your person is what you got to deal with, because there's nobody perfect out there. So,
Yeah.
at least you know what you're dealing with here. And then there's also so many other things in there too. There's history, and that affection has been there. And what are you walking away from? You're also walking away from your friends that you have together. You're walking away from extended family. There's so many there's so many issues with combining families and what our kids go through with divorce and all those pieces as well. It is tragic when a marriage breaks up no matter what.
Sure.
Now then, I think that there are cases, like I'm pro-marriage, absolutely, but I've also been through a divorce, and there are times to walk away.
Yeah.
And
To be honest, it's why I highlighted it, because I knew you'd have a measured response to it. It's not black and white. We know this. I think our clients are hoping that we know this. I knew sitting down with you that you knew this because I read your background and bio. So it's important just to hear the clear distinctions there of like what we're going to have to measure as a loss in those things.
Absolutely.
And doing that as you make your decision. And individuals who do that, who have those measured approaches, they do well when the divorce has to take place. I know some in my personal life. My significant other is one of them. And I've known them in clinical practice where I'm pro-marriage, but I walked with one of my clients, and it was a 3-year process where the husband, we tried everything to just get him to talk, just to like anything, like give anything.
Right.
We'd invite him in, he'd just sit there, like anything. We tried everything. And it took 3 years, and she laid down the ledger, and the equation was simple. I can't stay.
Yeah.
We gave every opportunity.
Right.
And talk about, I love that client, very measured woman, very upset, hurt, like really torn up about the loss, even in the face of somebody that just would not meet her there, just couldn't do it. And you run into that sometimes as well. where you're
Absolute-
grieving
yeah.
the loss of a person who maybe used to be able to show up, who just can't anymore for
Yeah.
one reason or another.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, that grief is also something that shows up in addiction because, or infidelity a lot too, because you're grieving what you thought you had. And you're grieving what your future won't look like now.
Yeah.
So that grief is such a big part of all of the process.
Yeah.
Whether you leave the marriage or not.
Yeah. Well, it's such a wonderful call out to grief that gets neglected. The types of
Oh, yeah.
grief. One of the ways that I educate my family members of alcoholics is, well, that's the same type of grief that, let's say, right, and there's a varying degree of how we're going to feel it, right, the depth of it. But when a mom loses their baby in the third trimester and she had all these ideas of like, what's the nursery going to look like? Maybe they did or didn't know the gender. They've got the clothes, the crib, everybody's excited. It's like all of that is grieved
Yeah.
for however long it needs to be grieved. And the family members of addicts oftentimes untreated don't know to grieve that. And so
Right.
then that gets carried into the next relationship where then people are looking from the outside uneducated, think like, well, they just choose addict after addict. It's, well, really what's happening is untreated grief that they didn't know they needed to grieve, trying to go into a new relationship and master it.
Right.
And we know, that's Freud. You're going to try to master it. You're never going to master it.
Right.
But
Yeah.
you'll get beat up trying.
Absolutely.
That's a given.
Yeah, we do. And, and then there's also like just, from the Al-Anon perspective of what's my part in it. Is it my fault? It's not my fault they're in their addiction. Like that piece has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
But how am I helping them stay there? Interesting. I had a couple dealing with some addiction, and finally she just kind of said, I don't want to do this anymore, because we talked about, so you can stay in this place and and that's okay if you pick it. But here's the trajectory, like the trajectory,
Yeah.
what it's going to look like in a week, what it's going to look like in a year, 5 years, 10 years. Where it's headed.
Yeah.
And even if it's the same, are you okay with it? And she's like, no.
Yeah.
And then, but she had kind of been in this space for a while. And then she said, nope, that I've had enough and nothing's giving here. So I'm going to have to leave.
Yeah.
And that's what it took. So like that,
Yeah.
it got the addict's attention.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It resolves one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. If you're unfamiliar with Al-Anon, which if you watch this show, you've heard us talk about it before, but what Laura was just really highlighting is the 3 C's. Can't control it, didn't cause it, can't cure it. And it's I've always found, I'm a member myself, I've always found this interesting axiom of like, I had to identify where I was selfish, self-righteous, self-centered, resentful, all these things, while also admitting to myself that I didn't control it, right? Never did. All of my attempts to try to control the addicts in my life, I didn't cause it, right? So then there goes my self-pity. But I like my self-pity. I want that back. I want to control that. It's like all of these little dynamics
Yeah.
that, if not tended to, we can start to see the picture of why we would need couples therapy and to sort these things out.
Yeah.
And thankfully, we've got wonderful people doing that work.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a question, unless you have any statements on that. I have a question. It's a kooky one. I ask everybody when they're new on the show for the first time. If we were going to build a mental health amusement park and you got to build a ride there, what would you name it? What would it look like? What would it do?
Gosh. I think I'd like the Ferris wheel, because you get on with a lot of excitement, and then you get up to the top and you kind of see what the reality is. And you can pick whether you get off on that round or not.
Yeah. I like that. What would you call it?
Ooh. Perspective.
Perspective. All right. Cool. Does it have a color?
Maybe a little of hope and regret.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. No specific color to the Ferris wheel?
I don't know about that one. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know.
No worries. We'll leave that up. I have a friend who's an artist, and she draws them on a poster. So she's working on last year's right now.
Okay.
So you may see
Okay.
yours pop up on a.
Yeah, I
yeah.
guess I'll have to be surprised,
Yeah.
kind of like you are when you get to the top of the Ferris wheel.
There you go. Any last words you have for the audience while they're listening to us talk here?
No, I just would say pull in that community and get the help for those pieces that you need to, because I promise you someone else has been in just as embarrassing or shameful or just feels like there's no way out. So many of us have been there. I would dare say everybody's been there at some point or will be if they haven't. So,
Yeah.
so
Community is
there's
important.
there's a way out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Laura Burr, licensed marriage and family therapist at the Marriage Place. We break the cycle here every Friday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. You will see us back here next week with a familiar guest, Jessica Seidel, LPC. She's joined us many times on the show, but we will be back next week, and we'll see you here. Take care.